Hi, how are you doing? Do you know, up until a few weeks ago, this was just a saucepan, a large saucepan and a wooden spoon. But of course, as of a few weeks ago, this has become much more of a musical instrument and a clanging, klaxoning, clattering instrument that someone like me uses on a Thursday evening at 8 o'clock to drown out the neighbours. Yeah, it's true. I am that annoying bloke down the road who, when everybody's out politely clapping on their front doorstep, there's somebody down the road who can't help but get the biggest saucepan out and see if they can make more noise than anybody else. Of course, it's entertaining and embarrassing for my daughter, which actually, as the father of a teenager, is probably about perfect in terms of the reaction you're looking for in most of your interactions with your kids. Of course, I'm not the only one who's banging like a lunatic on a large saucepan. I look down the road and there's other people doing something very similar. And the only difference between myself and them is that all of them are primary school age. So maybe we've got a bit of growing up to do. But there is something great about that Thursday evening when we'll go out on our front doorsteps and we show appreciation for other people. And of course, we're showing appreciation for people because they're literally, some of them, saving our lives. We're clapping for real, how we say it, modern day lifesavers, even heroes, some people talk about them. And I work for the NHS, and this amuses my daughter as well, because she kind of makes a big play of saying, "Oh, Dad, you're clapping yourself, Take a big bow down the road, Dad." But I don't work on the front line, really. I'm in much more of a supportive role, so I kind of feel justified, although maybe I have got a bit to learn in terms of humility. But I do wonder how many of us, when we're standing on our front doorsteps clapping for people who are looking after us, who've gone on the front line when most of us can't do that for ourselves, how many of us are also clapping for God? Because all the people on the front line, they can only keep us relatively safe. It's only a kind of a holding position until the definitive vaccine comes along. It's just a temporary supportive measure, albeit brave and necessary and something we're really grateful for. But of course, our Lord God, Jesus Christ, actually can provide ultimate salvation and victory for us. But I'm not sure we're standing on our doorsteps clapping for them and him, and even ultimately him. But I am pretty sure that if David was here now, that's exactly what he would have been doing. That's what would have been in his mind. And the psalm we're looking at tonight is one of the most best well-known passages in the Bible, Psalm 23. Now, I'm really showing off. I've got two Bibles here with me tonight. That's not because I'm particularly learned, but you'll see there is a particular point I want to make. I'll also be putting my glasses on and off, which is because I'm getting old. Please don't let that distract you. One of the benefits of doing a recorded message, of course, is that if you've forgotten your Bible, you can put it on pause now and go and get it. And that'd be great if you wanted to do that. So I'm going to stop for a minute. You can put it on pause if you want, because it's really good to have a look at your Bible while somebody else is claiming to understand what some of it means, because there's no need for that, is there? You can read it for yourself. So go and get a Bible. That's what I'd suggest you do. You don't have to, but I think it's a good thing to do. Have a look it up on your phone, or go and get the Bible from the spare room where it might have been gathering dust for the last few years, and read it for yourself as we go through. Okay, are you back? Right, here we go. So, I've got some notes here, so excuse me. See, glasses on, notes here. Finished the first page. That was the introduction. Won't give away all my trade secrets, although none of them are very secret, to be honest. So, the passage in Psalm 23 is actually quite short. And I think I would describe it as referring to what God provides us. He provides us with rest and refreshment. He provides us with protection, and he provides us with a safe place. But I wanted to look, first of all, at the bit that's probably best known, one of the best known parts of the Bible in verse 4. And this version that I'm looking at here, this is the bit about protection. This version I'm looking at here says, I'll just read it for you. It says, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." Now, the psalm, as it says at the top, was written by King David. He was living in real brutal times, and I'm sure it's true to say that very often he didn't know how much protection he was going to get at any given time. But some of the parts of the Bible, the Psalms particularly that David writes, you can see very much in his writing that his life was actively at risk. Even while he was writing it, but certainly in the days around when he was experiencing those things. And he lived in a very brutal time when health and well-being were far less of a certainty than they are for us. Except in 21st century Britain, they always have been until 2020. Because this coronavirus thing's changed all that, hasn't it? Life's no longer safe and protected. And I thought it was really interesting that in this verse 4, where it says, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death," David's actually talking about, it sounds like, living through a day when he thought he might not make it, actually confronted by the very real prospect of death right where he was. And I think for the first time, probably in my lifetime and maybe in our generation, that's something that we're confronted with now that we've not known before. Where I work in the ambulance service, the people who do work on the front line, for the first time I've ever known, and I've been there a long time now, these guys are normally very, very happy-go-lucky. They kind of put up with anything. They make probably inappropriate humour privately amongst all sorts of things because it's a way of getting through. And they're always just getting on with it. But now they're anxious. They're scared of what they might be taking home to their families. And I think lots of people are struggling with that and feeling that way now. They're thinking about the shadow of death. The valley of the shadow of death. Now, the reason why I've got two Bibles is because in the most recent version of the NIV, it's changed the words, much to my horror. So in the same verse, in verse 4, instead of the valley of the shadow of death, it says, "Even though I walk through the darkest valley." Now, I don't know why they've done that. And I think what they do on a fairly regular basis is they review what's written to make it relevant to the culture of the people who are going to be reading it. And so probably last year that was great because darkest times are probably something we much more understand than references to walking through the valley of the shadow of death. But I think now the shadow of death is something we need to know about and talk about. So I'm going to be praying they put that back in again next time they change it. Because I think we need to be thinking about God when we're confronted by the great enemy of death. So just to think a bit more about this passage where it's talking about David actually contemplating that he's going through this period and actually considering the prospect of his death. There's a few things that you notice. He says, "Even though I walk through," so it is happening. It's real life. This kind of stuff happened then and it happens now as we're seeing this year. And God never promises to his people that won't happen. He'll take it away. He'll take you around it. He'll kind of drug you so you never knew it was going on. David prays that as he goes through it, that God will protect him. And in fact, he has absolute assurance. "I will fear no evil, for you're with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." And so I suppose today we think about Hollywood movies with a personal protection team for the president and his as he goes in his motorcade. But we're not talking about a person or some people who might get at us. We're talking about a virus, a thing that no one can see, no one can stop, no one can ultimately protect us against. Perhaps the nearest analogy today would be PPE that's been in the news so much, that we're praying for that some kind of a perfect protection, a barrier, a thing that will keep us safe at all times. And David is saying he has absolute confidence that God will protect him, whatever happens. And so there's some relevance to that today in the context of things we've been thinking about recently. We all know people, don't we? People who've been ill, suffering, even struggling with their own loss. But what David's saying is, I'm not scared. I don't think he's saying, I don't care about the pain of separation and loss or death. He's not saying that won't be difficult, but he's saying ultimately God will protect me whatever happens, this side or the other side, this life or eternity. God's got this. I'm completely trusting in him. And I'm sure if he was here now, he'd be saying, we don't need to be scared. He's with us. God has got this. And if we truly believe that God knows us, sees us, counts every hair on our head, and has a place in eternity waiting for us, what can really happen? Nothing can happen. Take that away. So that's probably the best known part of this psalm, but I just wanted to take us through the other parts as well. So the first section, I think I would describe as God's rest and refreshment. See verses 1 to 3. And David talks about God as if he's a shepherd, and like a perfect shepherd. When God's my shepherd, I don't want for anything. He provides everything for me. It's like the imagery of a sheep with just the most perfectly lush meadows, the beautiful slow running stream, the calming waters, the gentle breeze in the trees. It's perfect tranquility, that rest and protection. So I think what the parallel for us to, now is that absolutely, whilst we don't live in that brutal environment where on a regular basis David would have been looking over his shoulder for the next attack from his enemies, we are absolutely living in a time where it's knackering being at risk all the time, either mentally or physically, whether we're at home worrying about it and protecting our families, or whether we're working somewhere as key workers and we're having to work hard. Maybe we're having to work in PPE, and that just makes everything so much more difficult, so claustrophobic and hot and cumbersome, makes the job more difficult, having to think more about how you do those daily activities of your work, how you keep things separate, how you keep everything clean. It just requires a lot more application, and we need rest and refreshment. We need time out. Now that might be the same for those of you who are spending more time at home than normal. Perhaps you're working at home, or maybe you've been furloughed. But I reckon that for a lot of people, that honeymoon period, if there ever was one for you, is pretty much coming to an end. It might have seemed like a bit of a novelty for the first few weeks. We're doing a few TikTok dances because it's a bit funny. We're keeping the family entertained. But after a few weeks, what is it? It's got to be, 4 or 5 weeks now? I haven't really been keeping count for a while. But by the time you get to here, you're starting to think you'd do anything to escape the claustrophobia of being at home, aren't you? You've had enough of staring at the same 4 walls, trying to be a perfect partner or the perfect parent, and you're almost willing to scream, aren't you? Just give me a break. Just give me a break. I just need a bit of time out. You can see people starting to drift off and breaking the rules, don't you? Which it could be disaster. We could find we get another peak, which is worse than the one we've already had. But you kind of understand it, why people are struggling to just do the right things and keep doing the right things. But if we look to God, and if we look to what David's saying here, in terms of getting some rest, some relief, some refreshment, the picture that David's painting is that God gives us perfect rest and perfect refreshment. What's your idea of perfect rest and refreshment that will absolutely satisfy you and help you get away from maybe the painful memories, the anguish that you're enduring, or maybe it is physical exhaustion. What is it that you need? Maybe it's that foreign holiday, which unfortunately is now being cancelled. But God gives that perfect rest, and no one can cancel that. God can provide you with rest now. And what David is doing and what he's modelling for us in his psalm is he's saying, I can relax in God. He gives me time out. He gives me refreshment. He refreshes me and restores me. He praises God for that in the midst of all of life's uncertainty and the fear-inducing circumstances of what we have at the moment, that we can always find rest in God. You can rest in him right now, knowing that he's got you. And when God's got you, no one gets in the way. So we've talked about God's protection, we've talked about God's rest and refreshment, and then finally, I think in the last couple of verses, verse 5 and 6, he's talking about God's safe place. It's true, isn't it, that most of us can put up with most things most of the time as long as we know there's going to be an end. So, you can put up with the screaming toddler or the resentful, surly teenager for a certain amount of time. At some point, the toddler will stop screaming, the teenager will go to bed at some point. You can put up with the school lesson with the most boring teacher who clearly hates me because the lesson's going to end and then you'll get a break. You can put up with a really tough shift because at some stage it'll be over and you can go home and crash and eat some chocolate or drink some beer or whatever it is that you need. As long as the end is in sight, we can pretty much get through anything. And in verse 5, David describes God preparing a banquet for him. See, verse 5 says, you prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies. So even in the midst of all of this that's going on, even though David is right in the thick of it, right there, he visualizes, he conceives that God is preparing a sumptuous feast for him. And it kind of reminds me in those passages in the New Testament, like in Luke chapter 14, where Jesus talks about heaven as being a great banquet, like the biggest party ever, with God as the host and us as the undeserving, but in some cases dragged in guests, because he's determined that he's going to throw the biggest party for us because he loves us and he wants the best for us. And David goes on as part of his description, he says, you anoint my head with oil. He's not earned his way in there. He's been chosen and marked out as one of God's people in that analogy. My cup overflows. It's like some people at the party are you kind of get an image that sometimes people at the party, and they're standing in the corner with their little glass and they're hoping someone will come and fill it up for them because they've already run out. Anybody going to notice me, guys? But actually in this picture, David's like the guest of honour. People, the servants keep coming and filling his glass up, and it doesn't just fill up to the top with the finest wine. It's constantly overflowing because there's endless love and provision from the host of the banquet. And David goes on to talk about that surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life. So every day of my life, he can see it going on. It's amazing terminology. It reminds me a bit when Paul was in prison singing God's praise. David's saying, even in the midst of this time when I'm in fear of my own death, he's saying that even at that time, surely goodness and love will be right there with me all the time. I'm absolutely assured of God's provision and never letting me go. All the days of my life, whether I'm in a period where God's got me in his pasture, whether I'm in a period where I have to dodge the bows and arrows, or I'm terrified about a coronavirus that's in danger of taking out me or my loved ones. even at those days, he recognises that God's love is right there with him, that is never separated from it. And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So the picture he's given is of assurance of God's presence and God's love and provision and overflowing gifting right now and forever. It feels like in David's mind there isn't really a huge distinction, that it's just kind of one continuous period of time, like now until eternity. It's all part of the time when I'm with God and subject to his protection and his provision and his lavish banquet that he's preparing for me. He's with me now, and one day I'll see the fulfillment of it when I get showered with those that wonderful blessing and gift when I'm with him at the great banquet. But for now there's a great blessing because I can see even now he's preparing it for me. He's looking after me as one of his children and never let me go. So in God's house, there's no fear of attackers. There's no killer virus that can live there. There's perfect protection forever. And that rest is coming. However hard it is for you right now. He's with us now, he's protecting us, he's providing for us, he's keeping us, supporting, he's giving us rest and loving us. But in the end, there'll be perfect rest for us. Just the same as he talks about a perfect party, a perfect homecoming, a perfect welcome. Perfect rest. And what he means is a rest from the challenging things in this life. So we've talked about God providing us with rest and refreshment, with protection and with safe place. But ultimately, of course, what we need is a vaccine. I think most of us have understood that now, that the measures we're taking against coronavirus, they're only transient, they're only temporary. They're going to help to keep people alive and support people whilst we fight off the virus. And whilst we develop antibodies and future immunity, hopefully. But all of that is only really going to work until such a time that the vulnerable people in our society can benefit from a vaccine and the rest of us can be vaccinated so that we don't keep passing it on around society. And of course, the thing about a vaccine is you get protection now and it sees us through. You don't need it again. And in a way, that's what Jesus is doing on the cross, isn't it? It's like a kind of vaccine against eternal separation from God. And the thing I really like about that analogy, although it probably does sound a bit contrived to you, I'm willing to take that. The thing about it is, it's the same thing in that, sometimes people talk about the gospel. In the gospel, it's already done. It's not about us doing stuff, trying to be better for God, trying to earn his favour, trying to keep ourselves safe, trying to earn a place in his kingdom. No, with Jesus Christ's death on the cross, it's that he's already done it back in history. He's died on the cross so that we are already saved. We can already know that even though sometimes we're going through the valley of the shadow of death, it's already sorted out. It's already assured that if we're trusting in Christ, we cannot be taken by anybody else. We cannot fail to remain his people and part of his promise for all eternity, because Jesus has already died for us. It's that kind of vaccination symbol. It was done back then. You had your spiritual jab, and now it's sorted forever. Now, that shouldn't be some kind of a mechanism for us abusing God's love. An appropriate response for us is that we want to love him, we want to serve him, we want to be his people and show his love back to him and also to people all around us. But the principle, the vaccine, actually works quite well. That in society we're looking for a vaccine against this deadly coronavirus, but nothing is as deadly, ultimately, as the things that are in here that come between us and God. They're the things that are going to get us in the end, whether we survive COVID-19 or not. In the end, sadly, death is the great enemy, an eternal death. And Jesus has made it so that we don't need to be fearful of that, because he's already paid the price on the cross for us. So, when we're clapping on our doorstep for our brave frontline NHS and key workers, when we're banging our saucepans, looking down the road at that bloke who's really annoying because he insists on banging his longer and louder than everybody else, as if it's some kind of a competition. And when we're reflecting on the selfless acts of other people and their work literally to keep us safe and in some cases actually saving our lives, let's also make sure we're cheering for the one who has the ability and the desire and has actually already made it so that he can save our lives eternally. The ultimate vaccine. So that whatever happens in this life, whatever we're challenged by, however tough it is, we can ultimately have that assurance that we're his and he is ours and we're going to be with him in eternity forever. And the assurance that provides, the foundation that gives us to carry on through even the valley of the shadow of death. Not in a way that as if it doesn't matter, that it doesn't hurt, that we don't empathise with those who are absolutely broken around us, but the assurance that God has got this and he understands it and he's given us a message of hope and love for all those around us is the greatest gift we could have and the most wonderful message we could give. Thank you for listening. Take care. Cheers.